You walk through the village at dawn and people turn their backs. A mother pulls her child away from you as if you carry disease. A shopkeeper who served you yesterday now closes his door when he sees you coming. You are not sick. You have committed no crime, but overnight everything changed. Yesterday you were a neighbor, a member of the community, someone people greeted in the street. Today you are invisible, worse than invisible. You are a ghost they wish would disappear. You stop at the well to draw water and the women gathered there go silent. They do not look at you. They do not speak. They simply gather their buckets and leave. You are alone, not because you chose to be, not because you did something wrong, but because you accepted a job that pays you in coin and isolation. A job that feeds your family but destroys your place in the world. And there is no going back. This was the reality in medieval and early modern Europe, particularly from the 1400s through the 1800s, a period when society was rigidly structured, and certain occupations were considered so morally and spiritually contaminating that anyone who performed them was cast out. These were not just unpleasant jobs. They were roles that communities deemed necessary but refused to honor. The people who did this work were essential to daily life, but they were treated as untouchable, forbidden from normal social interaction, banned from churches, denied basic rights, and forced to live on the margins. One of the most despised positions was that of the executioner and his assistants, but another equally isolated role was the knacker or renderer, the person who disposed of dead animals, processed their remains, and extracted materials like bones, hides, and fat for industrial use. Towns and cities needed someone to handle livestock that died from disease, injury, or old age. Without knackers, carcasses would rot in streets and fields, spreading plague and contaminating water. But the work required constant contact with death and decay, and society labeled anyone who did it as unclean, cursed, and unfit for normal life. His name was Friedrich. He was 26 years old when he became a knacker. He had grown up in a small town in southern Germany, the son of a cobbler. His father had taught him the trade and Friedrich had worked alongside him for years. But his father died suddenly from fever and Friedrich inherited debts he could not pay. Creditors seized the shop. Friedrich had a wife and infant daughter and no means to support them. He searched for work, but skilled positions were controlled by guilds that required money and connections he did not have. Unskilled labor paid almost nothing. Friedrich was desperate. Then the town knacker, an old man who lived in a shack outside the village walls, died. The position was vacant. The town council needed someone immediately. They offered it to Friedrich. The pay was higher than most manual labor, and it came with a small house and a plot of land far from the town center. Friedrich asked why the pay was so good. The councilman looked at him and said he would understand soon enough. Friedrich had no choice. He accepted. The work began immediately. Friedrich was taken to the knacker's yard, a fenced area on the outskirts of town where animal carcasses were brought. His job was to process them. When a horse, cow, pig, or dog died, the owner would bring the body to the yard or send word for Friedrich to collect it. He would skin the animal, carving the hide away carefully because it could be sold to tanners. Then he would butcher the carcass, separating bones from meat. The bones were boiled down to extract fat and glue. The remaining meat, if it was not diseased, was sometimes rendered into tallow or sold as animal feed. The intestines, hooves, and other parts were processed for various uses. Nothing was wasted, but the work was gruesome and exhausting. Friedrich spent his days surrounded by dead animals in various stages of decay. The smell was unbearable. Blood and fluids soaked into his clothes, his skin, his hair. Flies swarmed constantly. In summer, the heat made the rot worse. In winter, he had to break through frozen flesh with hammers and saws. Friedrich worked alone. No one would help him. The townspeople brought their dead animals, left them at the gate, and walked away without speaking. They would not enter the yard. They would not look him in the eye. Friedrich tried to greet them at first to maintain some sense of normalcy, but they ignored him. After a few weeks, he stopped trying. The isolation was immediate and total. Shopkeepers refused to sell to him directly. His wife had to do all the shopping, and even she was treated differently now. People whispered when she walked past. Other women stopped inviting her to gatherings. Children were forbidden from playing with Friedrich's daughter. The family was marked, contaminated. Friedrich's wife begged him to find other work, but there was none. They were trapped. The physical labor was brutal, but the social death was worse. Friedrich had been part of a community. He had friends, people he drank with at the tavern, neighbors he helped during harvest. All of that ended the day he became a knacker. He was no longer welcome at the tavern. He was not allowed in the church. When he tried to attend Sunday Mass, the priest stopped him at the door and told him his presence defiled sacred space. Friedrich stood there, stunned, as the congregation stared. He walked home in silence. He never tried again. His wife and daughter were still allowed to attend, but they sat alone in the back and no one spoke to them. Friedrich stopped leaving his house except to work. He became a prisoner of his occupation. The job defined him completely. He was no longer Friedrich the cobbler's son, Friedrich the husband, Friedrich the father. He was just the knacker, the man who handled death, and society made sure he never forgot it. Think about this. Imagine being cast out of your community not because of something you did wrong, but because you took a job that society needed but refused to respect. Imagine being treated like you are contaminated, like your very existence is shameful, while doing work that keeps the town functional. Could you handle that level of rejection? And what does it say about a society that creates jobs it considers too degrading for the people who perform them? The work carried constant risk. Dead animals often carried disease. Anthrax, rabies, and other infections could spread through contact with infected carcasses. Friedrich had no gloves, no protective clothing, just his bare hands and basic tools. He cut himself regularly while skinning and butchering. Every cut was a potential entry point for infection. He developed sores on his hands that would not heal. He had chronic stomach problems from working in filth. Once he processed a cow that had died from anthrax. He did not know it was infected until lesions appeared on his own arms days later. He became violently ill, burning with fever, covered in pustules. His wife nursed him, terrified he would die. The town doctor refused to come. Knackers were not his patients. Friedrich survived through luck and his wife's care, but the scars remained. And the work continued. There was no sick leave, no replacement. If he did not work, animals piled up and the town suffered. One incident stayed with Friedrich forever. A farmer brought a dead horse that had been his companion for 15 years. The man was visibly grieving, tears streaming down his face. He asked Friedrich to treat the animal with respect. Friedrich promised he would, but respect meant nothing in a knacker's yard. The horse was just another carcass to process. Friedrich skinned it, broke down the body, and extracted what could be sold. The hide went to a tanner. The bones went into the boiling vat. By the end of the day, the horse that had been a farmer's beloved companion was reduced to raw materials. Friedrich felt something break inside him that day. He had become a machine for processing death, and he hated what he had become. But here is what most people do not realize. Knackers were often prohibited by law from owning property inside town limits, from touching non-knackers, and even from using the same roads as regular citizens. In some regions, they had to wear specific clothing or badges that identified them. They were legally classified as dishonorable, a status that extended to their children and sometimes their grandchildren. Friedrich's daughter would grow up marked by her father's profession. She would struggle to marry. Any man who wed her would risk becoming dishonorable himself. The stigma was inherited, passed down like a curse. Friedrich had not just condemned himself, he had condemned his entire bloodline, and he had done it to survive. Now think about this. We still have jobs that society needs but does not respect. Garbage collectors, slaughterhouse workers, sewage treatment operators. We depend on them, but we look down on them. We pay them poorly and pretend they do not exist. Has anything really changed? Or have we just gotten better at hiding our contempt? Most knackers did not last more than 10 years. The combination of physical danger, disease exposure, and psychological isolation destroyed them. Some drank themselves to death. Others went mad from loneliness. A few simply disappeared, abandoning their families and wandering away to die alone. Friedrich lasted 7 years. By the end, he was unrecognizable. His hair had gone gray. His body was bent and scarred. He had lost most of his teeth. He barely spoke anymore, not even to his wife. He had retreated so far into himself that there was almost nothing left. Friedrich's end came during a harsh winter. He was processing a frozen carcass when his hands, numb from cold, slipped. The knife he was using plunged into his thigh, severing an artery. Blood poured out. He tried to stop the bleeding, but his hands were too cold and weak. He crawled toward his house, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. His wife found him collapsed at the door. She tried to save him, but there was too much blood. Friedrich died in her arms, silent to the end, his last words lost to the cold. The town buried him outside the cemetery walls. Knackers were not allowed in consecrated ground. His wife and daughter left the town shortly after. They had nothing and no one. The town hired another desperate man to take Friedrich's place. The work never stopped. Society needed people like Friedrich to maintain basic sanitation and public health. Without knackers processing dead animals, disease would have spread faster, towns would have been overrun with rotting carcasses, and resources like leather and glue would have been scarce. Friedrich provided an essential service, but society punished him for it. He was paid in coin, but also in silence, isolation, and exile from everything that made life bearable. He sacrificed his social existence so the community could function, and the community showed no gratitude. There were thousands of knackers throughout European history. Most died alone, unmarked, and forgotten. Their work allowed society to thrive, but they were never acknowledged as contributors. They were just untouchables, necessary evils, people to be used and discarded. The occupation eventually faded as industrialization changed how animal byproducts were processed. Centralized facilities replaced individual knackers, but the stigma lasted generations. Families descended from knackers carried the dishonorable label well into the 1900s in some regions. Friedrich's sacrifice was not just personal, it was generational. He destroyed his family's future to keep them alive in the present. Friedrich is gone now. The knacker's yard where he worked has been built over. The town that exiled him has forgotten he ever existed, but the dynamic he represented remains. Society still creates jobs it considers beneath dignity. It still needs people to do work it refuses to honor. Friedrich did that work. He was paid in coins that bought bread but cost him everything else. He lived in silence, worked in isolation, and died in exile. And if you think being a knacker was the most socially destructive job in history, there were others. Jobs that isolated people even more completely. Jobs that not only exiled workers from society but erased them from memory entirely. And some of those jobs still exist today, hidden in plain sight.